Hi, I'm Viraj Ramakrishnan,
And I'm Suryansh Loya.
and welcome to the Dialogue Hypothesis. Today we have the multi-talented Ebani Dhawan. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. That was a very generous introduction by you. But hi, I'm Ebani. I'm a second year Basque Arts and Sciences student at UCL. Really interested in the brain, which I consider the enigma of the body. And yeah, just really excited to be with you guys on the show.
Okay, so before we begin, I think we have to announce some enmity between us and you. Because you see, you went to JC
Ah,
and we went to
yes.
GC. So can you just elaborate on what you believe is better about JC or worse about JC?
And what in JC made you want to study psychology? We'll
Yeah,
make it
that's the actual question.
The actual question, but yeah.
I mean, well, we'll just preface this saying JC is superior, and
Yes,
we'll agree to disagree. I think that's the best way to leave it. I guess I was interested in psychology not because of JC, although it did foster my interest. I found you guys know Crash Course on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I found their videos on psychology, watched that, became obsessed. I was like, okay, there's actually a study of human behavior. Took that for GCSE at JC, and I had really great teachers who ended up being mentors and really helped me shape my path and figure out what I wanted to do in psychology. And it kind of led me to neuroscience. So yeah, I think that's how JC really facilitated that love. They really weren't hesitating to, I guess, go deeper and beyond the specification. So that was always a great conversation with the teachers.
And so at the start, you mentioned that you're a Basque student. Do you want to elaborate on what that is and why you chose it?
Yeah, I mean, I've done this spiel so many times to even UCL students. So it's, I guess, like a bespoke interdisciplinary degree program at UCL. And I guess the best way to explain it is similar to how the US major minor system works.
Right.
That's basically been applied to the UK, where there's four pathways, two which are sciencey, two which are humanities based. You major in one, you have to minor in the opposite. So I've majored in health and environment, which is essentially, I've made it into a neuroscience psychology pathway. And then I'm minoring in societies, which is social sciences. Yeah. So, and you've got to do core modules, which help you, bridge those two different, sides of the academic spectrum together.
And yeah, go
That's
for it.
really so. I was just going to come back to what you were saying about how you watched a bunch of Crash Course videos. So I, as a connoisseur of Crash Course as well, I watched the bunch of history videos. But what was your favorite effect or heuristic that you discovered while on Crash Course, or in general in your exploration of psychology?
Oh, it's been a while since I've seen that, but I think it's not really a heuristic or a cognitive bias, but I think I was really fascinated by the Stanford prison experiment. And
that's a classic.
yeah, it's like a definite classic. And it was just wild to me that humans could be that horrible, really.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to put it.
I probably should be described as a classic. So looking forward,
it definitely is a classic. And then I guess, later learning that it was definitely a flawed experiment, and those results have never been replicated anywhere else. But still, it's just wild to see that, even if it's this really tiny subpopulation, people have, the ability to be that cruel.
Yeah. You see, whenever you see shopping carts abandoned in Le Marché, you realize, oh, people aren't good.
Yeah.
If it doesn't directly affect them, then it's like.
That's true. And I don't know, talking about the Stanford prison experiment, there's a lot of ethics in psychology and experiments and stuff. So what is your opinion on that? Do you enjoy the study of ethics? I don't know. Is that a big part of your course? Do you want to, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken a course this year called, it's all about policy issues in the life sciences, and it's really, really interesting. I mean, he's tried his best to relate everything that we're covering to the coronavirus. And I think one really interesting thing about ethics is I just learned this term last week called vaccine nationalism. And I think it kind of gives it away in the name, where, they just want to hoard the vaccine for their citizens. But for instance, take the States, they've already pre-purchased large orders of the vaccine from various manufacturers. But I think I read that they weren't really bothered about what the price of the vaccine was. So they weren't going to ensure that it was affordable for everyone. So I'm like, who is it really benefiting? Considering, you know, it's usually people of color who are on the lower end of the class spectrum, and they're also the ones who are suffering the most from this virus. And who is it really benefiting, really?
Yeah. And there was a really interesting Bill Gates, like the Foundation commissioned a study where they showed that like if you equally distribute the vaccine to like countries based on their population versus the people who can afford it more, it's a much more like effective way of reducing like the virus, and like over the long term it's so much more beneficial to all the countries involved. But I guess selfish countries are selfish, and that's what they'll do.
Yeah. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you see it, money just makes the world turn round and round.
It's really interesting to see, or rather not interesting, it's really saddening to see that there's a lot of race that's in medicine still. And even though like after the Human Genome Project, it was sort of proved that race doesn't biologically exist, there will still be doctors who say that, you know, people of Indian descent are more likely to get heart disease or whatever, and these other biases that exist. So I think it's really telling that, you know, health and, you know, race and society, they're actually very closely linked. People like people would ask like, why is it that COVID is affecting people of color more? And you get really revealing answers about what people think about, you know, how health works in relation to race. It's really,
I think those kind of biases they must have started or have been rooted in something. I guess I like to see like somehow there is an intertwining between race and culture. So I guess for us, like like Indians from South Asia, we tend towards, you know, having a higher risk for cardiovascular disease, but it doesn't necessarily always mean because it's our ethnicity. I think it's because of our culture as well, our diet, that kind of thing. I think, it's hard when, you know, medical professionals generalize it to the entire population, but it's hard to find that line because, you know, generalizations are just an easy way for our brain to figure out the world. We're stimulated all the time with the thousands of sensations our 5 different senses are always receiving.
All conversations lead to neuroscience eventually. I see that.
Mate, of course. I'll always do that. And I feel like it's literally like the final piece of the puzzle, which is, you know, life. If you figure out the brain, you've basically figured out everything else.
Yeah, so
I don't know, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I was going to ask, because we had this question. You were saying how the brain is like the final mystery. It's like the thing that we just can't understand. And like, we were wondering, what do you think? Do you think that we'll ever be able to sort of crack the brain, as in we'll be ever able to model it computationally? Do you think that's possible?
That's a really interesting question. I would like to think no, because I wouldn't want to I don't want to see what a world would be like if you've basically got a computer version of the brain, and who knows what people will do with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I'd say, I guess no, because we've got synapses, you know, eliminating all the time, being developed all the time, strengthening all the time, and that depends on experience. And what do computers really experience except the data that we put into them? And it's still got those inherent biases that humans have. I would say no. Basically, that's my answer.
Wow, that's a really interesting answer.
So I don't know. I don't know. This is kind of a weird question, but you talked about like how computers are just like they'll just be algorithms that follow exactly what the humans are doing. But do you think humans then inherently have like free will, and they're like an independent like organic organism that's different to like a set algorithm and stuff?
Yeah, I think Viraj needs to like alter his previous statement. All conversations lead to like free will and determinism rather than the brain. I mean, I think I spoke to Viraj about this earlier. I would like to think that I subscribe to what I call soft determinism, where the choices that are presented to us are determined by whatever, but the fact that we have the choice between those various options, that's where our free will comes into play.
Really?
But is the choice that we make determined on like all our past life experiences, and is it already determined? I don't know.
I would like to say that's where the free will comes into play. That choice that we make, the options we didn't get to choose. There's no free will in that; those have been determined. But I guess, yeah, just for me to feel, slightly narcissistic and be like, oh, we humans have a reason for anything. There's free will in making that choice.
Fair enough.
It's fascinating. I was reading some Buddhist text for my class, and exactly this point was being raised. And they were really like our knowledge of the brain as being sort of, so as far as we know, as being just an algorithm. We haven't found anything that would suggest that, there's something above that. The Buddhists were saying this, and they were saying, well, if we're all basically input zombies, we just take input, process it, and give an output, surely free will can't exist. Surely that means we're just all destined from like, it's ultimately deterministic. So I think it's really fascinating that we're still having the same questions. Like we've done a lot, but we still haven't answered that core question. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah. So I don't know, kind of moving on. I don't know if you've read or like heard much about like Elon Musk's Neuralink, his whole thing.
Yeah,
I just wanted to hear your like opinions on that.
Yeah, I haven't delved too much into it, but I think it's again the ethical issues. He seems to be presenting it as like, oh, it's only for good, and kind of avoiding, of course, as any commercial business would, avoiding the negative potential uses of Neuralink. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, but it's sort of blurring the lines between what's human and what's technology. And I don't know yet if I'm ready for that, to be honest. Yeah, so I guess that's my current like opinion of Neuralink. I figure once he's talked about it more and once we actually see it in action, I reckon I'd be able to.
Because there was I think a month ago or something, less than a month ago, there was a demonstration on a pig where like they were able to like, I don't know, feed it information via a chip or something and like connect directly to its brain.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about the inputting. The outputting, I'm sure, is like very useful, can be great for things. The inputting into the brain, that makes me a bit wary.
Kind of scary. Yeah.
That's Inception.
Yeah.
That literally is Inception.
Yeah.
That's very frightening. But I don't know. It's terrifying to think that you'd be able to influence someone's brain, because I was used to think that the brain is like the last fortress of our independence. Like you can tell someone to do something, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. As in, you can't change someone's mind. That was why I was so terrified when I read 1980.
Oh yeah.
Because it was like, you can, to have his mind changed like that, like forcibly changed, and then he doesn't even resist after a point. That's just that just goes against everything that I would think. It just seems so wrong that you could destroy someone's free will like that.
I think there's a study that was done again relating to free will and determinism. I think so. Just a summary of it basically concluded that neurons were firing in our brain before we made the conscious decision to like move our hand. So like I feel like that plays into that determinism thing, that the brain is already working before you've made that decision, that free will choice. And again, plays to that final conversation: is it free will or determinism?
And it's really fascinating, like that thing is that implies that consciousness is just sort of like a commentator. It's sort of like you do things and your consciousness is like, oh yeah, I want the orange, that's why I did that. And then so it's sort of like explaining that idea is presented in Buddhism. It's insane. it just blows my mind that they had the foresight at that time to see that. Anyway, that's beside the point.
I guess it also just talks about like how little we've advanced in our knowledge about the brain.
Exactly.
Like however long.
It's crazy. It's absolutely insane.
It seems like superficially we were like so much more advanced, but really at the end of the day we're still as confused as we were centuries ago.
So I wanted to ask about how the guests we've interviewed all on the show before, they've all said the fields that we're looking into studying they're going to be radically different by the time we get into the job market. They're going to be intertwined in different ways, and they're going to be interacting with different fields in different ways. How do you think psychology is going to be interacting and developing with different fields over time in the future?
I think like a simple answer, and I think something that everyone is currently seeing is that the increased importance of mental health. So when people usually think of psychology, they think, oh, mental health and therapy. And yes, that those points are very important. Those are really important aspects of psychology, but it's definitely much more than that. I would say something that I'm personally interested in is space psychology. So how astronauts, what their mental state is going to be like in those long isolated missions, especially since we're looking towards Mars and perhaps beyond. So I'm really interested in how humans mentally deal with super extreme conditions and how you can, I guess, develop that mental resilience to, I guess, mitigate the effects that you will, I feel, inevitably experience when you land back on Earth.
I guess, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just to say, I think NASA was saying they're going to make the team to Mars entirely women because they're just more stable. Like that was a thing I heard.
I mean, I don't know, maybe that's probably accurate.
I was going to say, yeah, coronavirus was a good probably test run for that, like in terms of isolation, just hanging with the same people for months on an end.
Yeah,
exactly.
People, there have been effects like it's hard to be alone.
Yeah,
I think
for sure.
we all learned that it's difficult to be alone. Actually, there's a very interesting sci-fi book called, I think it's called The Illustrated Man. I always plug this book, but anyway, it's just a collection of short stories, and one of the stories is about this guy who goes insane on a spaceship. So he's just there's like a crew of 3 or something, and he just is entranced by the void that's outside his window, and he just gets driven completely insane. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's at all possible that, you know, space travel could drive someone sort of out of their mental faculties?
I mean, it literally is changing your worldview, being out in space. And maybe to some, it's destroying everything that they thought and held to their heart really closely. Because I guess really out there, it feels like you really realize that we're nothing in the grand scheme of things. And there is, I can't remember the name, but there is a psychological phenomenon on how different astronauts' view ends up being of the world and the society they live in, coming, you know, compared to before and after their missions. And yeah, so I feel like it's a very valid, and probably I would expect that to be a very common sort of experience that maybe these astronauts would feel. Considering there's like at least a 20-minute delay in communication. Like if we're doing a call like this to, you know, the Space Center down on Earth, there's at least a 20-minute delay. So there's not really that fluid communication that we're used to here. And that just adds to that feeling of being isolated.
In space, no one can hear you scream for 20 minutes.
Yeah, sorry, this is just me. I thought it was like, I think the ISS, you can still do like live video calling and stuff. Like you can still do that. But I think when you get to Mars, that's when like, what's it? The distance between is like 16 light minutes or something. And so therefore, then it gets like impossible to do like live talking and stuff. And so
yeah.
I know the Earth is.
I'm sure, like for the ISS and the Moon, they figured it out. But considering where they're going,
But I know the Earth is like 7 light minutes away from the Sun, so probably a similar distance. So you're right. It's a genuine challenge. Like when you're out in the solar system, like there's a lag.
Yeah, and it's also like you've got no one else to rely on. Like imagine you're on Mars and something catastrophic has happened. Like it takes 32 minutes because it's a round trip for them to go there, get processed, and then come back. And so you're basically on your own. You can't do anything. On The Martian, there's a really good like chapter about that. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I need to read it. Oh my goodness.
That's a good book. Anyway.
have you read it?
Yeah, it's a good book.
Ebani, have you read The Martian?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's a classic.
I really should read it. I was watching clips from the movie for whatever reason, and it looked so cool.
Yeah,
it just looked amazing.
Yeah.
So actually, we will ask a lot of our guests about what they think the future of music is. So we asked this guy who's big
Yeah.
into AI music development. We asked him what he thinks the future of music is. With your angle in psychology and also your eclectic music taste, what do you think the future of music is?
Well, this is going to be a very unpsychology answer, but have you guys heard of the YouTube channel Two Set Violin?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so they had, I've recently been quite obsessed with them, and they have a video where they're comparing actual composers with AI composers, and it's absolutely amazing what AI can create and mimic in terms of classical music and the different styles and periods in that time. So I definitely think, there's going to be more of AI, involved somehow in music, whether that be, to suggest what chord progression to do next, or actually making the sounds or whatever. But I think that might result in I guess, a greater push in creativity from humans, and we may hear new sort of sounds and progressions and all of that sort of stuff, different things than what we're currently used to right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know, with classical music, it's a very rigorous structure, and it's very easily mimicable because you say this note is followed by this note because it's in this scale and stuff. But and it's very easy to like mimic previous artists. But I think creating new music is the difficulty that AI faces right now, like being actually creative.
Yeah, it's the difference between AI and AGI, like general intelligence, like having like something more than just finding patterns and saying what's next. Something more than that, we may still be very far away from that.
But isn't that what humans are? They're just like finding patterns and trying to mimic it, though.
But surely,
we are literally. It's I was reading something about sleep, one of these papers, and dreams are basically us trying to find patterns in what we've experienced in the day. We look at the clouds, we're trying to find faces or shapes because we just like patterns that much, or it makes us feel like maybe at the end of the day we are some sort of AI. But that's, I guess, a conversation for another day.
Yeah, I guess we're just, biological intelligence instead of artificial intelligence. One could say that. Like if you track the eye movements, if you show someone a photo of the face, the eye will like go to that eye, nose, mouth, because like just looking at a face activates our facial recognition thing.
Yeah.
Exactly like if you're opening your phone with your face, it says, oh, I'm looking at a face. Let me just scan your face, and then you recognize the face. So to me, it's so strange that that's not too different from what we do. So that's.
I think like don't humans have like a separate part of their brain for like facial recognition, or is that just me like remembering something wrong?
No, there definitely is. I haven't read about that in a while because it's not really an area that interests me. But yeah, you're definitely right. There is some sort of process or like specific region for facial recognition.
What do you think is the most interesting part of the brain?
I mean, the entire thing. I can't choose.
I mean, you just said that the facial recognition is not not what you're interested in. So there must be something that you're more interested in.
Maybe the rest of it, except facial recognition.
Ebani's looking through the brain. She's like, cool, whack, cool. Just not the facial recognition.
Basically, yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could say, the front, like the prefrontal cortex and that kind of region, because that's where that higher process thinking lies. And I'm pretty interested in creativity and perhaps like the neuronal basis of creativity and how that actually works. How is someone creative? What defines creativity? And leading on to that, does that help you in becoming, really intelligent? Does that help you define a genius? And that kind of that relationship is super fascinating.
It's funny you should bring that up because I actually know you actually did a research project on the neuroscience or the biology of genius. So what did you find out? What interested you about that project specifically?
Oh, it was what was it? It was like an online summer course, one of those Yale ones. So did that it was on it was called Brains of Genius, and it was a really fascinating course and got me into creativity and intelligence and interdisciplinarity. I'd say that transition between, the Renaissance man, we were all polymaths back in the day, and then post-industrial era, due to division of labor, it's all that specialization is now everything, and you've got people trying to be hyper specialized, take the field of medicine on like the most niche thing possible. But isn't it, I mean, and there's definitely a need for that, but I think we're perhaps underestimating the need for generalists in every walk of life, really.
Yeah.
All right. So shall we move on to the, funny you should mention that, the general questions?
That's so bad. That was such a bad transition.
That is a horrible segue.
But we'll go with it. We'll go with it. Yeah. So what we normally do is before we like to ask some general questions to everyone. And so, yeah, let's just get straight into it, I guess. So the first question is, what's the biggest challenge you have being a student / psychology / neuroscience / everything right now? And how are you approaching it?
I guess the biggest challenge of like me being a student is that I'm interested in too many things. And unfortunately, the education system's like, you got to choose this. You can only take these many credits in a term or in a year. So that kind of frustrates me that I can't continue to dip my toes in different areas that I would like to explore. Because I'm more of a process of elimination in everything I do. I'd like to try everything, and if I don't like it, okay, sure, I'll put that to the side.
All right.
So this is just a set of random questions. So are you a morning or night person?
I mean, neuroscience says that I should be a night person, but
oh, how come?
I guess.
What do you mean by that? So, like, is there a test
to
see?
So, no, not a test. I guess.
BuzzFeed quiz.
Like it's like a BuzzFeed quiz. No, it's because at this age, I guess from 16 to 23, our body clock shifts towards it shifts, and then I guess post 23, when we're finally settled into what they call adulthood, it either stays there or it shifts back to what we're supposed to be, because there is a general variation. It's an evolutionary advantage. You don't want everyone in your group sleeping at the same time and everyone's vulnerable.
But then following that, is there a reason why 16 to 23-year-olds have got a later schedule compared to everyone else?
I think obviously, like everything in biology, it's sort of it's a rough estimation of when that body clock shifts. I'm not entirely sure why it shifts. Perhaps it's some part of the developmental process. I'm not too sure, but we sort of like settle into one when we're a kid, then it shifts later that we want to sleep later and we wake up later, and then depending on the person, it'll shift back to the morning side of the spectrum.
All right then. So what's the biggest surprise you've had in the last few months and why? And the preface is you can't talk about coronavirus.
Biggest surprise. I mean, I don't think anything phases me now. Just looking at the news.
That's such a mood.
Yeah, it's like when, for instance, like when Trump got coronavirus, I was like, yeah, of course, like why not? Yeah. And when he mentioned, I don't know if there'll be a peaceful transition of power. I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Oh, he said that thing where he's like, oh yeah, my DNA is like the strongest they've ever seen. It's USA.
Yeah, he's like, oh, I might be immune. I was like, this is not how like immunology works, but okay.
So would you say the thing you've been most surprised about how not surprised you've been?
I mean, I don't think that surprised me either.
Fair enough.
I guess this is like a follow-up question that isn't part of the general question. Like, do you think, how would you solve the issue of like the world becoming more and more distrustful of scientists? Like, because there's been a growing divide of people who like being less trustworthy scientists. They don't believe it as much as people used to before. It's like, what do you think the solution is to that?
Science communication, like that is becoming way more important, whether that's through people showing up in media, writing. Science has, I guess now it's getting, I think like the best example is taking the reporting of COVID. there's too much like politics. There are way too many politicians intertwined in that process of communicating what's going on, and I think that it's hard to detangle, but I think it needs to be detangled, and I think that's I think one of the best ways of trying to encourage trust in science, because we're all trying to learn about the world we live in, and we're all living in the same world, so we all need to know what's going on.
Nice. So one of our other questions is, if you had an extra $5,000 of budget, how would you spend it and why?
This feels like a Stanford essay question, I swear to God. 5,000. Geez, I don't know. That's a tough question. I mean, probably I'd buy an electric guitar.
Nice.
Yeah,
that's a good answer. That's a good answer.
That's what I would do. Like, I've got the classical here, and I get Viraj introduced me to Wolfpack, then obviously Corey Wong, and I was like, okay, I want to know how to do those funky rhythms, and they just sound horrible on like nylon strings. So yeah, that's what I do.
The transition to electric is always a glorious one. I can attest to that.
I've actually gone back though, to be honest.
Seriously,
I went from classical to electric, and now I just play because it's so much easier to just pick up the classical and like play, because you have to get the electric.
Yeah, that's true. It is
the whole thing.
That is true. That is true. That's why you just leave it on always.
And I feel like
that's also easier.
Always play. That's
sorry.
If you leave it on, you just always play it. So that's the issue.
Yeah.
All right. So the next question is, how do you continue to learn in order to stay on top of things?
I mean, it's as simple as just reading the news, being aware of what's going on, and also talking to and reading, talking, and being exposed to different viewpoints. I think that's something I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing, whether I agree with them, disagree with them, that's out of the question. I just I just want to know what everyone's, train of thought is like, and what the different conclusions are from the same, data or thing that we're receiving.
It's really interesting how people can interpret the same data in different ways.
Yeah.
They can look at the same graph and say, this is my conclusion, this math, and it can be completely different.
Especially in science, where you'd think it'd be really objective, but there's so many different interpretations of it, which is quite.
And I think, like, taking it back to, us being biological AIs, essentially, I think that's where humans differ into AI. We can't really put different lenses, as far as I know, into AI. It's only going to be the lens of the person who coded it, really. Unless they've done something you folks might probably know, but as far as I'm aware, it's just like one lens that the AI.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was it.
I was about to say, so like going on the biological AI side of it though, like maybe it's just us putting our own things that we've seen in the past, like recognizing patterns in the past and implementing it on this data. And so each person's got their different life experiences and then just force it on the data, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense. Then it's a very deterministic way of looking at it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's really hard because both sides, I guess, make sense. To me, it seems like determinism makes more sense, but just like the emotional part of me wants to think that we have some sort of free will. But yeah.
All right. So another question is, what are some of the things you're researching the most right now? What's really fascinating you right now?
I'd say it's still with the creativity genius thing. That continues to interest me. Because it feels like there's a really good quote about genius. If I remember correctly, it's genius it can't be easily definable, because that's basically the antithesis of what genius is. So just going on that rabbit hole of trying to see what the links are, how people define it, and how people perceive genius, because it's really interesting to see that there was a psychological study where they found that, just the everyday man, they perceived a hard worker in a more positive light than than someone who we think of as a genius. So they presented Thomas Edison, and who's known to be a hard worker. What did he say? Like 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. And then you've got Einstein, who's, you know, classed as, yo, he's a genius. He just knew everything somehow. Yeah, and people, I think, favored Edison in whatever test they did in that. So it's quite interesting to see that we idolize and we inflate the term of genius, yet we still prefer the hard worker.
Is it because, I don't know, like subconsciously we think that we could be a hard worker if we put our minds to it versus like
yeah, it definitely, I feel like it's more, it seems closer, you know, that finish line of being a hard worker and getting the work done, and genius has that sort of, oh, I wasn't born with it aspect to it.
What do you think about that? Do you think people can be born with genius?
It's the classic nature versus nurture debate. Yeah, I feel like there definitely is some sort of you know, biological basis of it, but you definitely need the right environment to nurture it and, you know, have that fully expressed and bloomed.
Yeah.
Do you think we could get to a point where like people could identify who are geniuses when they're born and like
that's scary?
Train people especially to like, I don't know, you've got a genius school. Because we like, there are like that type of things with, I don't know, in different parts of the world, there are like grammar schools and extent where if you're smart, you go to a special school or like stuff. But do you think it could be even further down, like tested when you're born and then like just isolated from normal people?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't thought about that. Because I don't think you'll ever find, you know, a quote unquote genius gene anytime soon. And so I would say if there was that, I feel like that definitely would happen. But in my eyes, I don't think there is a genius gene, because I see genius as like a culmination of different, you know, perhaps biological characteristics.
Yeah.
All right.
You know, it's interesting. I was just binging The Good Place.
Oh yeah.
That is an amazing show.
So I'm on like season 1, episode 8 or something, and I started yesterday. Anyway, I was watching it and I was like, it's really interesting. They sort of implicitly post it when they're like, this is the action, and we have an infallible algorithm that calculates how good the action was and how bad the algorithm was. And then and then we just said you're in the good place now. So it sort of links into that. Can we objectively say something is genius, something is not genius, something is good, something is bad, or is it all just subjective?
Yeah, I don't want to spoil the show, but that's like a huge part of the like later in these seasons. They talk about that a lot.
I figured.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a very interesting thought. Anyway, I mean, yeah, I've got no more questions.
All right, that was lovely. It was brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It was a really fascinating conversation. I learned a lot. So
yeah. All right. I'm Viraj Ramakrishnan.
I'm Surya Shoya.
I'm Ebani.
And thank you for listening to the Dialogue Hypothesis. Hope to see you next week.
See ya. All right.
Done. All right. We're good.